Hey guys, this is podcast. I always go for the number. I don't remember the number, but it's another podcast, and we have on a guest that I'm really excited about. Paul Gibbons. He is. I'm not exactly sure if he's like semi-pro or pro poker player or more recreational. Where he falls in that, but he does that. He is a writer. He has a book published called The Science of Innovation and Change, I believe. The Science of Successful Organizational Change. He sent me a copy of his new book, which is almost published or ready to be out there, which I actually think is really interesting and good. And I'm a pretty huge book snob. But anyways, without further ado, thanks for coming on, Paul. I appreciate it.
Hey, good to talk to you. You've had some interesting people on here.
Right. So I'd like to get a start on your background, like what it is that you actually do for a living right now, or what you did in the past.
What I do for a living right now. I mean, I do play poker for money right now. I don't know if that makes me a professional, but it's about 10% of my productive hours, maybe 15%, somewhere between 8 and 10 hours a week would be tops. I do take a month off and play the World Series in June. I did consider going professional in 2011, 2012. I had a few $100,000 in live cashes, about 350, I think, which is pretty good in a very short period. But I do other things. It's worth for me. Poker uses an insufficiently large part of my brain. You know, the thousands of books I've read and the 3 or 4 university degrees and my interest in history and philosophy and the physical sciences and the big conversations that are shaping the world. I know you're passionate about education. I'm passionate about social justice. I mean, all of those things. Poker is just doesn't reach deep enough into some of that cool stuff. So about 10% of my productive time, between 10 and 20, is about right for me for poker. But I do use that income to, put groceries on the table and so forth.
Right, right. And you used to be a scientist and entrepreneur as well. Is that right?
Well, it was weird. I was a very I'm going to use this word. It's going to sound grandiose, but I was a very brilliant teenager. I finished college when I was 18, and and um, and I had a lot of promise as a scientist. I'd grown up with science at my mother's breast, to use a metaphor. My dad was a scientist, and my parents were lifted out of poverty, real poverty. I mean, they were born just after World War II, and in England, and there was a lot of they came from very working class families, coal miners and manual laborers, and so my parents were the first ones to go to university, and for them, education was their way out of. It was a white ghetto, but it was nevertheless a ghetto in Scotland and Ireland, and so part of what I was brought up with was the possibility, or some psychotherapists might call it a wound, but that education is the route to betterment and accomplishment in the world. And my dad became a professor, and I went to his lab the whole time. So I was very clever. I learned to read very early. Did calculus when I was 14 and all that kind of stuff. And then about that time in college, I started drinking very heavily at the University of Wisconsin. Partly, I think, because I was 4 years younger than everybody else, and I wanted to feel comfortable, talking to girls and all of that kind of stuff. What I now know is, of course, that no teenage boy feels comfortable talking to girls,
Right.
but I thought I was the only one at the time. And so I thought that being the Marlboro man, smoking Marlboro, and drinking whiskey neat, and that would give me a certain savoir-faire with the chicas, and so that was my. Anyway, I got started down that route, and so for about 15 years, I battled, quite a lot of creative talent with, call addiction a mental illness, if you will, but it certainly was a big part of my life for 15 years. And I went to work on Wall Street and like poker, I think Wall Street for me, I was a trader, an options trader. Again, uses a very tiny bit of my brain, my education, my intellect, my passions in life. Um, Eventually, the alcohol and eventually it was heavily cocaine use. I was making $1 million a year in today's money when I was 22, so I did pretty well. If money is the measure. But I was pretty washed up by the time I was 30. I got sober, became a management consultant.
What was the catalyst for you to quit?
My life was trashed. I mean, I was living on couches. I had a lot of family and girlfriends and friends and everything like that. My mother and my father, brothers and sisters. But if it hadn't been for them, I might have been homeless. I mean, maybe they enabled me. Maybe I would have had to get sober faster. But I did the couch trip for about 4 or 5 years.
Did you just blow through all the money, basically?
Yeah, in about a month.
Sounds like a fun month.
No. I mean, when you're going to the south of France and, drinking and, the places where Princess Caroline of Monaco drinks and buying pharmaceuticals and all that kind of stuff, you can blow through a lot of money pretty quickly. It didn't take a month. It took a year or so. So, yeah, I was pretty washed up. So, I mean, anybody who took a look at me, and so, there was a sort of this disconnect between someone who saw himself as very talented, whether that's true or not, who knows, and someone who was a fuck up. So I decided to stop being a fuck up. I mean, I say it took me 5 years to decide that, but it was like I woke up. But kind of eventually I woke up and I realized what people had been telling me for years, that I had a problem with drugs and alcohol, and that I needed to do that. If I was going to amount to anything, I needed to.
Do you think you had to hit rock bottom to change, or do you think you could have done it differently, like looking back?
I don't know. It's so seductive, the lifestyle and partying, and if you have any psychological pain, alcohol and drugs is a good way to numb it. And so, do I have a theory about that? I think I did. When a doctor told me when I was 26 that I didn't have long to live if I kept drinking in the way I was drinking. By the way, I lied about how much I drank, but he still told me the gig was. He says your liver is about 60 years old. So I did. I think no amount of rationality and facts and from people. I had to come to a realization by myself, and I had to go pretty far down. I didn't get hospitalized or no mental institutions, no jail. Although I dealt cocaine, so I might well have spent time in jail if I hadn't,
This is a weird question, but would you wish that you kind of hit rock bottom faster then and just accelerated?
Fuck yeah. I wish I'd hit rock bottom when I was 20. I mean, I spent a decade really just like making money on Wall Street and chasing girls, and I wouldn't give up the chasing girls part, but with just kind of wasting my life. I mean, a certain amount of partying is fun when you're 20s, but when it's just dominates your life. And the other thing is I love reading and ideas and books and history and science, and I didn't read a book for 10 years. My life was completely devoted to hedonistic pursuits.
Right.
There's a lot of people in the poker community. I think Greg Merson's out as someone who had a problem with drugs and alcohol. There's quite a few of us around. And then there's a few people like Scotty Wen, which probably ought to have hit a rock bottom, but haven't.
Right. So what strategies did you use to help you quit?
Oh, Alcoholics Anonymous was basically all I needed. I mean, I was very lucky. And I got sober in London, and there were tons of good meetings, and I went to meetings with lots of household names, people, some of whom have been in the press recently because they've died. But yeah, very, very highfalutin crowd of people who I felt like I hang out with. You know who these guys are: Eric Clapton and Anthony Hopkins. I mean, there are people who are out. People like Ringo Starr used to go to my meetings. I mean, Elton John. It was a pretty lofty crowd of meetings. So my ego, I think if I'd had to go to meetings with a bunch of sort of Bowery drunks, I think. But, I hung out with these guys, and the great thing about Alcoholics Anonymous is people help each other out. And I had a lot of fun. I don't really go anymore. I haven't been in like 15 years, but I needed something like that to help me out.
Right. Did you need to find a replacement to kind of deal with, the pain that kind of life brings? Because you said, drugs and alcohol are the things you turn to when you have pain. You didn't have that to turn to anymore as a crutch, so what did you use?
Yeah, I did a bunch of other therapy and personal growth workshops and all that kind of stuff. It's interesting. That's a question I haven't asked myself. I didn't start. I mean, I had problems with impulse control around spending and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't know. It kind of all sort of got better at once. Over about 5 years, I started to look more like a normal person. Yeah, a bunch of therapy. Stop blaming my parents for shit. And all that kind of stuff.
Yes, because it's something I think about, like, with a lot of habits. So if you want to get rid of materialism, right, because I think we both agree that's long-term just a bad type of thing to rely on. But the problem is if you use materialism to also make you feel good, it's also kind of the same way you use drugs. Now that that's gone, you kind of have to find something else to replace it with. Same thing with cigarettes or any type of habit.
Yeah. I quit smoking shortly after that too. But I mean, I think it's just about being comfortable. I mean, it's this thing I said as a teenager. I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. I wasn't comfortable around girls. I wasn't comfortable in social situations or something like that. Here's the dirty secret: nobody is. But some people are kind of okay with that kind of social discomfort, and I wasn't really okay with it. So I needed to fix it. But by the time I was 30, I was much more comfortable in my own skin.
All right, so let's talk about the book. As someone who's been trying to write for a year and a half, I think it's just pretty impressive, anyone who could finish a book. It just seems like such a difficult process. How do you deal with, like, the war of art, as Stephen Pressfield calls it?
Well, I hadn't really written a word till 2013, and it's one of these things. It could be a rock bottom type moment. I moved to Colorado. I didn't have much business life in Colorado because all my business connections are in London and elsewhere in the world. So we moved to Colorado, and I'm in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's very beautiful, but it's very boring. Mm-hmm. I didn't really have any work, and I was pretty broke. I didn't really have any money, and so I'd wanted to write for a long time, but the catalyst for it was like in the middle of 2013 was, Jesus, I'm not doing anything else. I might as well fucking write. So what do you write? And I wrote a very quick self-help book called Reboot Your Life, which is just a set of tools like what's your vision and what's your plan and how do you manage time and how do you get complete about stuff from your past, and just very ABC type stuff from the kind of personal growth and coaching world. So Reboot Your Life, and I don't know how many it sold, a few thousand copies, something like that. Not very well. It took me about a summer to write it. You can find it online for $1 or $2. The book that you got now is a sort of reworked version of that, which has a bit more content, a bit more science. I was never super proud of Reboot. I was proud to write a book, but I was never really super proud of it. At the same time, I set out to write a big book, which has a New York publisher called The Science of Organizational Change. And that's a book which is basically on management consulting and helping businesses change. And again, it sold a few thousand books. I get $5 a book. So, it's not only not enough to get rich. I call it my Get Poor Quick project, actually. My Get Poor Quick scheme.
Right.
But I enjoy doing it, so there's a certain love of doing it for the sake of doing it. And I'm building a portfolio of of books that I've written now. So I think the one that you got could be counted as number 4. The one I'm about to start work on could be counted as number 5. And so that's from a cold start in 2013. So, you know, that's pretty good. I mean, I think I'm very proud of that. You know, the fact that I've been able to reinvent my career and you know, get some.
I personally think it's really good just because I find writing very difficult and painful as well as enjoyable. It's enjoyable enough to bring me back to it and interesting and gives me it's a sense of importance enough to like, it always drags me in. I find it.
The dirty secret is that everybody finds it a bitch.
Yeah.
Like Hemingway found it a bitch. You know, like people who are very, very good. I mean, perfectionism is both an ally because it you know, you write to a higher standard. You do a little bit more research. You spend a little bit more time trying to find the right word or the right turn of phrase or the right metaphor or the right quote. So perfectionism is part of what you need to be a writer, is wanting your writing to be great. Writing people want to read, but it's also a horrible enemy. I mean, it's horrible, horrible, horrible. Like, I think the main cause of writer's block is, you know, just not being able to think of anything good to say. Finishing a book is because the book's not perfect. You know, the book's not. I didn't write for a long time because I didn't think I could write anything that people would want to that I would want to read myself. I have very high standards for books. I don't read shitty books. You know, most books in the management world and the self-help world, I think, are garbage. And I wouldn't spend time reading them. I read, you know, intellectually highbrow stuff. So I wouldn't allow myself to write because I thought what I'm going to write is just going to be, I couldn't write anything, you know, that I'd want to read. But eventually, I think the thing, like for you, if it permit, is just to finish something. I mean, even if it's a 100-page self-published book, semi-autobiographical story of your journey, you know, finish it and put it out there and start something new. And I think finishing something is a good way to start. If you know what I mean. That sounds weird.
Right. Yeah, I've with perfectionism, I've spent 1 month on like a 2-3 page blog post or something like that.
Which one is it? I should have a look. It must be pretty good.
It's not even that good. Like I look at it now and I compare it to blog posts that I write in like a few hours, and I think my ones I do now are better that I get done in a few hours.
Well, that's good. You're getting better. I mean, one of the things with life, right? One of the things I try and teach my kids, one of the most important things with life is being able to be a beginner. And it's one of the things that computer games teaches and poker teaches is nobody picks up a violin and goes, oh, this is dope. I want to do this for the rest of my life.
Right.
You know, you need to get good before the enjoyment. I think people think about these things the wrong way. Like, I'm going to naturally enjoy this, so then I'm going to get good at it. I think of a lot of things in life, you kind of get good and then you enjoy them. That's not strictly true. But anything in life that's worth doing is hard, and anything that you start doing, you're going to suck at, you know. And so my kid, when he starts playing League of Legends, he sucks. But he found that it took him 2 years not to suck. And I think that's a great lesson for life. You pick up a tennis racket, and for the first year you suck. And then you suck a little less, and then after a few years you suck less. I mean, I know people who quit golf. He said, I tried golf once. I wasn't any good.
Right.
Are you fucking kidding me? It took me a year to hit the ball in the air. You know, I mean, you know, people have this fantasy that you can learn anything. Like, we don't learn shit that way. We don't learn mathematics that way. We don't learn calculus. We don't learn reading and writing that way. It takes a decade before you're any good. We don't learn anything that way in life. But people have an idea that some things, and writing is a thing, that we should be able to just like fall right into it and be good right away. And it's not the case. It's very hard to be good.
Yeah, I read a lot about strategies for success and all that, but it just seems like the best one is pick something and do it for like a decade straight and always focus on getting better. And if you do that, it's almost impossible to not have some amount of success or career out of that or anything.
I'm reading one of your blog posts while you're talking. You have a nice style. You're a nice writing style.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I liked your book, and I was initially skeptical reading it because I'm a pretty big book snob, and I wasn't expecting, if I didn't like it, I wouldn't have read many pages. But I got really into it, and your stuff on happiness is really interesting because it's something I've been thinking about, but almost afraid to say out loud. And can you kind of explain to listeners your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah. Well, I'm not the first one to think of this, right? So far from it. So
Uh,
2,500 years ago, the Greek philosophers, and this is the first stuff we've sort of read about
well,
happiness.
to be clear, this is the first time I've seen it the way you've put it.
Oh
But
well, that's kind of you. So yeah, I mean, Aristotle and Greeks and Epictetus and all these guys started to think about, well, what is the good life? And they came to the conclusion that happiness was one of the aims of the good life, but that you couldn't be happy by trying to be happy. So this is not a new idea by any means, and that the more you tried to be happy, the less happy you'd be. The more you tried to grasp happiness, the more it would recede. So there's something paradoxical about that.
yeah, I think it's called ironic rebound effect or something like that.
Yeah. So not enough people read the Greek philosophers, I don't think. I mean, some of them are hard to read it's written 2,500 years ago. They had a certain way of writing. But
Uh,
they had a lot to say about things that we're just discovering in psychology. Anyway, if you fast forward to the 21st century, then there's this movement called positive psychology, which starts by saying we want psychology not to focus on neuroses, but we want psychology to focus on the good life and on happiness. And sure enough, what they came up with was something called human flourishing, which is called different things by different people, but I kind of like the word human flourishing, and that basically reiterates the Greek idea that what's important in life happiness isn't the most important thing. And so the thought experiment I ask people to do in the book is, would you say that a soldier serving their country, for example, is happy? No, they're doing their duty. They may be satisfied with their life. And we honor and revere such people. Is a teacher teaching in an inner city school happy? No, there's a sense of mission and doing work that's important that needs to be done. Is Mother Teresa working with the poor happy? Is someone summiting Everest? It's Redmond Hillary when he summited Everest. Did he do it to make himself happy? So a lot of the people that we would admire in life, we wouldn't say that happiness is like what defines their life, right? It would be honor, it would be service, it would be valor, it would be meaning, it would be fulfillment, it would be helping others or serving others. It would be, this sort of. There's much more to life than happiness, and so we like all these other things. So what's
all right, so to interrupt, so play a little devil's advocate. A buddy of
okay?
mine, if he was listening to this, he would say that the utilitarian argument is that happiness is the only thing we want in and of itself. So therefore, that's the number one thing we should maximize.
Well, that's where we took a dirt road. Philosophy took a dirt road with utilitarianism. It's not completely a busted flush, but the utilitarian thinkers, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill and John Stuart Mill's dad, were the sort of the creators of the legacy of utilitarianism, and the greatest good for the greatest number. But they defined the good as human happiness, and I think they started with that as a premise, and then they said, how do we get more of that? Well, we have this thing called utilitarianism, where the greatest good for the greatest number. But they took the good as a premise. They didn't, in a sense, set out to define the good for human beings as happiness, to argue for that. They just took it as a premise that happiness was the most important thing. I think it's a false premise.
Yeah, I was thinking about the argument, and I think there are other things you want in and of itself. Like, I think virtue in and of itself is something that's valuable. So, for example, people don't want money just for the sake of money. Like, they want money because they think it brings them happiness, or they don't want cars for the sake of a car. Like, they want a car for, like, the feelings it produces. But I think there are other emotions you want in and of themselves, like peace and virtue, I think would be some of those.
Yeah. And they may vary for different people. I mean, some people it would be honor, some people it would be patriotism, some people it would be value, virtue, some people it would be social justice, some people it would be environmental justice. And these all sound very noble, but you can pick. I mean, there are people who are committed to, it's not a point of view I take, individual liberty is the organizing principle. We should organize maximally around maximum liberty for the individual. That's a good way to organize society. So there are people committed to big causes. But let me tell you what the flourishing framework is that I use in the book, which I've cobbled together from a bunch of different
Yes, that would be good.
research.
So yeah, I'm gonna tangent you sometimes, so it's very good for you to get back on track.
Yeah, don't worry about it. So yeah, I'm a very digressive kind of thinker as well. But anyway, so flourishing has 5 dimensions. So one of them is engagement. So how much does what you're doing, what percentage of your capabilities, of your talents, does what you're doing engage? People talk about chess, they talk about rock climbing, they talk about being in a state of flow when you're using all of your skills, a surgeon doing a difficult, operation or whatever it is, where you're bringing all of yourself to it. So how engaged you are with your life is one of the dimensions of flourishing. Does that make sense to you as something that's important, as being really into what you're doing?
Absolutely, and I think that's the thing I like most about skill mastery, is getting to that point where you can achieve flow. So Paul's talking about this guy who wrote this book, Csikszentmihalyi.
That's the guy, right?
Yeah, and if you're interested in him, you should check out his TED Talk. But he also has a book, which is, I find, very dry and difficult read, and only if you're super interested in the topic. If you're less interested in the topic, want a more easy read, I would definitely recommend Stephen Kotler's book. I think it's called The Rise of Superman or something, and he talks about guys who do extreme sports and,
Yes.
and how they get into flow and the type of neurochemical response they get. And I mean, when you're in the flow state, you're releasing all these chemicals like norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, and all that, and it's just this incredible state, basically. So yeah, I'm absolutely in agreement with you that engagement and flow is super important.
I read, I think, some of The Rise of Superman. I think it was a very interesting book. And yes, so there's flow for you. Csikszentmihalyi's book he was the first guy, I think, to the flow thing. And flow is similar to Eastern mystics, the experiences described by Eastern mystics as well. A sort of oneness. Tennis players talk about seeing the ball as being moving really slowly and being really huge when they're in the zone. Just like everything seems. And poker players talk about that too. Poker players talk about being in the zone, where the world kind of disappears and you're just kind of at one with the table, and you're everything. I don't know how to describe it better myself. Maybe I don't get in the flow when I play poker. So we talk about that. So that's engagement, and then there's another dimension of it, which is fulfillment. I call it spiritual fulfillment, which is doing something that's meaningful. And that's maybe where something like poker, which can create a high sense of engagement, might fall down, because, what's the meaningfulness of the poker life? It's not creating much, what's the spiritual fulfillment of it? Not much, right? So let's face it, it's a fairly self-centered activity. But a lot of the people we admire in the world, and a lot of what the good life could be defined as being fulfilled and deriving meaning from life. Like what I'm doing is meaningful. It means something to me. I'm committed to something bigger than myself. So that's two things. That's engagement. That's spiritual fulfillment. The next one
So
is
there's a counter argument that you might be interested in, and
I'm sure. Fire away.
so the counter argument with poker is kind of like this Japanese idea of like finding the way. You know, if you read books on
Yeah.
of samurai, they talk about finding the way through becoming a swordsman and learning character and virtue and all that through the practice of swordsmanship. And I believe a lot of skills have that. And I think I found that myself in poker. So when I was 14, I dropped out of school. I failed 7th grade, dropped out of school. Felt like I was kind of starting from scratch. You know, I wasn't like good in school. You know, obviously I failed. I failed English, by the way, 'cause I hated it. Um,
There's a certain poetic irony there.
yeah, and I was an extremely rigid, superstitious kid. You know, I'd walk on the streets like trying not to step on cracks, and you know when I'd watch like basketball games, you know I'd make sure I'd wear my hat a certain way or not leave during like a critical part of the game, or sometimes I would leave. You know, maybe I thought I was bad luck or whatever.
You're like a high functioning OCD.
Yeah, and the practice of poker, if you want to get good at poker and you're practicing it the right way, you start to understand ideas about odds and logic, and eventually the ideas of kind of superstition went away. And more than that, a lot of uncertainty comes into play because the more you understand the game, like the less you understand. And that kind of happens for everything, right? And that's rather humbling, and you kind of apply that to other situations. Like in a lot of situations, I'm like, I spent 14 years and, you know, maybe 20,000 hours on poker. I know so little. Like, how much can I possibly know about this topic? And it's very humbling, and it allows me to be able to say, you know, maybe I'm wrong here, or want to dig deeper and learn more about it, and know that there's so much deeper and so much more. So that's a very long digression, but I think the mastery of something can lead to a lot of the characteristics you're talking about.
Yes, I think, I don't know, we could treat this as a hypothesis. I think to be good at poker, you have to master yourself. You have to have the discipline to study. You have to have control over your impulses, both in terms of how you spend your money and how you manage your bankroll. You have to have control over your emotional impulses, otherwise you're a tilt monkey at the table. So I think if I'm understanding your samurai metaphor correctly, that it's a way, sort of a path to self-mastery, basically, of self-discovery and self-mastery.
Right. The emotional impulse is an interesting one because ego was one that really fucked me over in my career. So I just always wanted to be the best, and I always just had a very high opinion of myself. So my strategy, I didn't game select at all. I looked for the best, toughest tournaments with the biggest buy-ins, the biggest, highest amount of glory, and I just played those exclusively. And as a result, I've had 6 or 7 six-figure downswings, and I ended Black Friday $250K in makeup.
Oh, did you? Jesus, that's a bad way to start.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a very profitable career. I mean, not like elite level, but very profitable career, but it would have been a lot better if I've mastered my ego, for sure.
Yeah, there's a good side to that though, is you know, so I mean one interpretation is your ego, but the other thing is, you know, and maybe this is the good part of the ego, you could say it's like part of the ego. Did like Sir Edmund Hillary climb Everest, you know, to feed his ego? You know, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. You know, it's something to me is like you wanted to play poker, your chosen profession at the time, and you wanted to achieve great things in it,
Right.
and you were be satisfied with winning the $250 freeze out at Foxwoods.
Right.
You wanted to, yeah, you wanted to. So is that ego? Yeah, maybe. Maybe. We were on flourishing. So the third dimension of flourishing, by the way, is achievement. And that's one of the 5 dimensions is of the good life, the flourishing life, according to, contemporary researchers, is achieving things. And so it's possible to achieve things and not be happy, and it's possible to be happy and not achieve things. But certainly part of the good life is, for me, is achievement, is looking back on my life or a year, or as I've achieved something of value. I don't climb Everest, but writing my first book at 53, I think that was a big achievement. Getting sober, that was a big achievement. Starting a company, that was a big achievement. That's important to me. Some people are more organized that way than others psychologically. Some people value achievement to the point of neurosis. I don't think that's the case with me, but mostly not the case. But I'm a big believer in going for it. So you see it as a kind of an ego-driven thing. Would we see it the same way if you'd succeeded, is the question? If you'd set out and you've actually binked one of these things, and instead of being, someone who's 250K in makeup, if you'd binked one, you'd be, you'd be Jason Mercier, maybe, whoever, or someone like that,
Right.
It would have started you on the road to, high rollers and, I don't know.
No,
That's
I definitely
speculation.
get what you mean, and it's been very valuable in a sense that the only reason I got so good is because I constantly played with guys who kicked my ass and learned from them. I think I took it too far, though.
Yeah, possibly.
I think the amount of 6-figure downswings I've had was very bad for my game and my level of achievement. And after Black Friday, I couldn't travel as much as I wanted to because I had 250K in makeup, and traveling to a tournament where I have to get top 3 to make something.
Right.
That doesn't make much sense. So I didn't get to play as much poker as I wanted to during that time.
It's crippling psychologically too, because we know that it's randomness and variance, but we forget that it's randomness and variance when we do very, very well. We attribute it to skill, and then when we don't do well, we tend to attribute it to negative variance.
Right.
But it's still soul destroyed. There's still so much doubt. One of the great things about poker is somebody who's a really bad player has confirmation bias, and they only remember the times they had huge wins, and that keeps people coming back. There's so much variance in the game that bad players can do very well, sometimes for longer periods of time.
Right.
And
I think if I had
that keeps the game alive,
Right.
basically.
Right. I think if I had a chance to go back, I would still want to play those big games, but
Yeah.
I wish I would have gotten more help, more coaching, and also supplemented with the easier games, because I didn't play any easier games.
I wonder how I won $300,000 in 18 months.
Right.
I was like 5 years ago, and I'm 10 times the no-limit player that I am today. But I didn't have particularly crazy run good, silly 1-outs, 2-outers, kind of suck-outs, but I had the kind of run good where people would make absurd folds to me. Somebody on the bubble of this tournament where I won almost $200,000, we were on the stone bubble, and I shoved 9s from the button, which is, I had 14 big blinds or something like that.
Right.
Hardly wild. And the guy in the big blind folded ace king face up. It's like he knew I was flipping. I was like, yeah. And then on the same thing, 3 hands before, a guy opened under the gun, an aggro-looking kid opened under the gun, and an old man flatted right next to him, and I had ace queen in the small blind, and again I was very short stacked,
and I certainly probably had a better hand. So I shoved in my 14 big blinds. The kid turbo mucked, and the old man folded queens face up. So, and then there was another tournament. So this is a different kind of run. We don't talk about this kind of run. You'd see about the 2 hours, and then I was on the small blind, and there was a guy with a 13 big blind stack in the big blind, and I had ace-7 offsuit, and of course I shoved ace-7 offsuit with 13 big blinds in the small blind, and the guy went into the tank for like 12 minutes before he folded ace-jack face up.
Wow.
So that's kind of good run. That's my kind of run good anyway. But
there's all kinds of run good in poker for sure. And that's what makes it so hard to kind of tease out what works and what doesn't, or what's helpful and what's not. Because, like you said, there's so much bias in what's going on and so many variables, and people are too results orientated. And perhaps I'm being results orientated about the ego thing, even.
So let's finish off human flourishing real fast. So there's engagement, so how much you're captivated by the task that you're in, which can lead to a state of flow. Yeah. There's spiritual fulfillment, the meaning that's attached to your pursuit. There's relationships, which we haven't talked about much, but that's one of the things that's a great predictor of longevity and mental health is quality of your relationships. The fourth thing we've talked about is achievement. And then the fifth thing is actually what psychologists call positive affect, but it's happiness. So happiness is part of the flourishing picture, but it's one of 5 dimensions rather than, the big dog that Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill told us it would be. And it's in the Declaration of Independence too. And I think happiness is really what makes you unhappy? If you think you ought to be happier, it's a guarantee of being unhappy.
Right.
That's one of my, I think, most quotable quotes. Is there's no better guarantee of being unhappy than the thought that you ought to be happier.
Right.
Right.
So there's this Stoic idea. I don't know if you've read Seneca, Letters of a Stoic.
A little tiny bit, actually, here and there.
So Paul mentioned earlier how the old Greeks were kind of difficult to read. I think Seneca is one of the most easiest to read, although I haven't read Epictetus. And he talks about, and I think Epictetus probably said this first, and he often steals from Epictetus, and says that he does in the book, that one of the things that leads to happiness is the knowledge that what you have is enough, to view what you have as ample and great wealth.
That's Seneca?
Yeah.
That's so funny. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they say it's having what you want, not wanting what you have, not having what you want.
Right.
That's a kind of an echo of that idea. But how interesting.
I find I struggle with this because the idea of being happy with what you have sometimes would just lead to apathy for me. Okay, things are good, I'm just gonna chill. Whereas the idea of I need more causes me to kind of work harder, do more things. I don't know. Do you get that at all? Do you feel like reading Stoicism, like Epictetus, leads to apathy or anything like that?
No. I mean, I suffer from depression. I go in and out of depression, very mild depression. My depression looks like me not feeling like working for a few days or a week. But sorry, tell me the question again. Sorry,
Right. No, just I feel like being happy with what you have has led to apathy for me, and I was just asking if you ever felt that way.
No, actually. Yeah, I don't know whether I've educated myself to. I mean, I'm kind of happy most of the time. I mean, even when I'm depressed, I'm happy in a way. I've learned how to be a friend to befriend my depression in a way. When I'm
when I'm depressed and don't feel like working and really unproductive and play computer games all day or do some other kind of displacement activity or something like that, I've learned to be kind to myself about that and know that it will pass and not beat the shit out of myself, not make it worse by beating the shit out of myself. And I think that's
how or when did you learn that?
about sometime in the when I realized that I had been periodically depressed throughout my life. I wondered to myself why some people I knew, when they get depressed, it spirals downwards. And my theory about that is they get depressed about being depressed.
Right.
So they take their depression, which is, low energy, low motivation, low self-worth, low self-esteem, and they cascade that into I'm worthless, the world sucks, I'll never amount to anything, blah blah blah. But they take that and it just becomes a snowball, which I think propels them lower. As my stance is, okay, I'm going to go through one of these weeks or one of these periods. I'm just going to chill out with it, and maybe what I need to do is not do anything for a week. And so
you kind of just let it. You understand that.
I don't like catastrophize it. I'm a kind of a friend with that part of my psyche as well. So I don't like snowball it. I say, okay, I'm fucking depressed. All right, maybe I won't do anything this week. But I get stuff done, right? I'm on my 5th book now in 4 years. So shit eventually gets done.
Right. Things kind of...
but it just doesn't get done. Like, I don't wake up at 6:30 in the morning every day and write until 4:30. The kids come home. My life never looks like that.
Right.
And so that fantasy about how my life should look, I just don't entertain that as a possible life for Paul Gibbons.
That's so great, because I notice myself doing this when I get depressed. I get upset about being depressed. I get mad at myself. I berate myself, and it adds to it. But I've experienced before just letting it pass and like, okay, this is the period where I'm going to be depressed. It's eventually going to pass. And I find that it just passes faster.
I think it does. And I think if we were to write a book, if I were to write something that was semi-autobiographical, I don't know even whether this is in the mental health canon as something about being depressed is something. I don't know whether our idea is new, or I've never seen it written in any psychology books. So we may be onto something.
I've definitely heard it.
Being kind to yourself and befriending, your mental health is the way your mental health is. And okay, there's shit you can do. You can have some therapy. You can do antidepressants and stuff like that. But once you're doing, we all have I think it's comparing. It goes back to what I said about teenagers, like feeling like I was really shy and couldn't talk to girls, and I was really socially uncomfortable. And the dirty secret was everybody was that way. All teenage boys are really nervous around teenage girls. And it's not comparing myself with the fantasy of how I think I ought to feel.
Right.
I ought to feel like, the guy who's on the football team who looks like super confident. Little I know, he's wilting inside when he's talking to this girl as well. So there's a fantasy about how I ought to feel or how life ought to look, and then there's the way it really looks. And just not living in a world not allowing myself to compare my life with a fantasy of what a good life looks like.
I think that's really cool, especially in a culture of, there's a lot of people who do self-help or whatever, books, and, try to help people, and they feel the need to kind of like paint their lives as like this perfect, utopia of production. It's cool to just see like the honesty of like, I have weeks where I have a week where I get nothing done. That's just more real. So was this just, you had this realization and then you just stopped doing that, or was it more of a process?
Yeah. I wouldn't have owned the fact that I've been sort of wrestling with depression through most of my adult life, even probably since perhaps I was a teenager until maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And now I sort of own the fact that, so rather than seeing myself as this brilliant guy who could have been a contender,
which would leave me feeling dissatisfied with my life because I'd be comparing my life with the fantasy of this kid who did calculus when he was 14 and graduated from college when he was 18.
Right.
So if I compare myself with that, I'll go, well, I haven't done shit, right? I haven't got a Nobel Prize. I haven't got a Pulitzer. I haven't, right? If I compare my life with what I think the fantasy life would have looked like. But if I compare my life with a guy who's been struggling with mental illness his whole life, with addiction and sometimes depression and sometimes impulse control issues and something like that, I think I'm doing pretty fucking good. Again, I've had an enormous amount of success in almost everything I've touched, including poker, which I'm an amateur at, but writing books, starting a business, consulting career, my Wall Street career. I mean, I've done okay given a guy who's got my liabilities, if you will. And so that lets me sort of be at peace with my depression, as well as I guess I've had it for long enough, and I've always managed to achieve in some sort of modest way, despite all that.
Right. Yeah, I think.
And for writers, by the way, one thing I've noticed, and this may help you a lot, is there have been times when I've had what's looked like writer's block or depression or whatever, where I've been literally unable to write a word. If you write 300 words a day, you'll have a 100,000-page book by the end of the year. 300 words is a fucking paragraph, right? Right? And 100,000 is a long book. Like the book that I was published by the New York publisher of my Sides of Work Change is 78,000 words. So 100,000 words is a long book. And the book that you're reading now is 23,000 words or something. So what I found was that when I was really, really stuck, is that because there was something that needed, like I was stuck because something sucked. Like if I was writing a chapter and I was stuck writing a chapter, frequently I'd come out of that week and I'd go, you know what, this chapter is fucking horrible. And I don't, or this chapter doesn't belong here, it belongs here, or this chapter needs the following addition to it, or something like that. So actually, one of the things that helped me as a writer was out of those kind of down periods. It was frequently, I don't know if this is true or not, but it seemed to me that there was some wisdom coming out of it. Like the stuckness was in order for me to figure out what was fucked about what I was writing and why I was avoiding it. So that may or may not help you.
That's interesting, because I had the same realization about, I guess it's the same thing. I don't know if you call it stuckness, but I spent most of 2016 being tired.
Yeah.
And just complaining about being tired. Like I journal all the time. If you look through my journal, it's like, I'm tired. I'm mad about being tired. Why the fuck am I always tired? Why do I always complain about being tired?
Right.
Why are you such a bitch?
Right.
And I kind of realized that being tired was just signal that what I'm doing just isn't that engaging. Because I noticed I wouldn't be tired if I played League of Legends. I wouldn't be tired if I did a podcast. I'd stay up to 2 a.m. I wouldn't be tired if I was, out doing something fun with my wife. I wouldn't be tired if I was playing this game called Dominion with my friend. We'd stay up till like 3, 4 in the morning.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting. Maybe when you're stuck, you're stuck for a reason.
Well, that's positive, yeah, and that allows you to not snowball your stuckness into I'm a piece of shit and I'll never finish anything, and I'm this worthless fucking guy who,
right,
whatever. Yeah, that being okay with the stuckness, I think, is part of the way to get unstuck. This has been really fascinating. Let me ask you a question. Did you end up, after dropping out of 7th grade, I never technically dropped out of 7th grade, kicked out of 7th grade. Did you go to a private school? Because they don't kick you out of public schools for failing 7th grade. Were you in a private school?
No, I just illegally dropped out. Didn't go to school anymore.
Oh, your parents must be very understanding. And so when did you go back? Because did you go back at all, or where did you end up?
Well, the parents part, I didn't have parents. I had like a grandfather. They wanted me to stay in school, but I guess they kind of just felt bad for me, and and I just had a really hard time at school, and
sure,
they kind of just like, okay. So I got a GED at some point because I was
Right.
going to go back to college. Then I was like, fuck college. And yeah, that was basically it.
So you lost your parents when you were young?
Uh, yeah, my dad died when I was 2 or 3, and then my mother decided I'd be better off living with my grandparents. And I don't know, I've seen her like a few times ever since or something.
That can't have been easy. So you went back and did a GED and decided that college wasn't for you.
Yeah, basically.
I don't know. You've got the mind of a you've got a curious mind, a scholarly mind. I mean, there are not many people throw around Seneca and Epictetus and in the same sentence as they're throwing around neuroscience and endorphins and in the same conversation as they're throwing about you have a certain attitude towards learning that's really, really, constructive. I mean, you're clearly a guy who likes to learn. So it's interesting. Yeah, I found college to be so much better than high school. I fucking hated elementary school. I sort of tolerated high school, and college was the most enjoyable time of my life. But I don't know if that's true, but whatever. It was pretty fun, and it was partly fun because I was learning cool shit.
Right. I think, maybe if I went, I would enjoy it. I just, back then, it just, the method, the lecture style just didn't work out for me, and that's what all my classes were. I think for a certain subsection of people, that method is very valid, and and even now at this point, like lecture style, I think is really interesting to me and really effective. Like listening to a book is basically a lecture, or listening to an audiobook or reading a book. But back then, I just didn't really I just didn't learn at all in that way, and found it incredibly boring, and I didn't find anything that I was being taught rather useful or anything.
Yeah, no, I mean, you go back, people who drop out because because they ought to go to college and because all their friends go to college or their parents want them to go to college and they're studying some subject that leaves them cold, and then they drop out. And then when they do go back, they go back for really different reasons. They do back because of a love of learning and wanting to learn for learning's sake rather than learning to keep mom happy or learning to, achieve certain thing. And I think you're intrinsically motivated to learn. And that's one of the big things in psychology is extrinsic motivation doesn't really work. It takes the joy out of the thing. If you're extrinsically motivated, if you're motivated to do something because of rewards or to avoid punishment, then it kills the intrinsic motivation. And if you haven't run across this before, it's worth reading the sort of one-page summary of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. But you're intrinsically motivated to learn. So right now you learn for the sake of learning,
Right.
not for the sake of getting somewhere or keeping somebody happy.
Yeah, I think that realization that, so I ended school thinking learning was this terrible, kind of boring experience, and I kind of just set out to never do it again. But once I started learning with poker, I just read every book that there was, and I started reading books, and I was able to apply what I've learned. And then I'd learn about math and odds, and be able to apply math to actually make money or get better at the skill. Use that to achieve my greatest goal in life, my biggest mission. Which was back then, be the greatest poker player in the world. For like a decade, that was my life. That was my first waking thought every morning, for a decade.
That's a noble. I think that's a noble goal, and I hope you get there.
It's not my goal anymore.
I hope you get there with the balance that I think you enjoy in your life, which is having a rich intellectual life and having other things that turn you on and get you out of bed in the morning, and having that thing. Certainly that's the way I like to organize my life. Is that poker's something that I enjoy doing. It's recreational. It's some time off. It's profitable and all of that. But I want you to have all the success in the world in the poker world. I mean, I think probably it's almost certain that you have all of the skills you need to win something big. It's just a question of waiting out the variance. I think probably in your case.
Right. Yeah, poker's really taken the back burner. That dream has kind of like died almost, and kind of just been replaced with teaching and all that.
Well, don't let go of it too soon. I mean, you can construct a poker career around 20% of things. Play 5 or 10 weeks a year, perhaps. Tournament series and stuff like that, and have that still leaves you 42 weeks a year to dedicate the stuff that to use the stuff that we've been talking about,
Right.
and stuff like that. I mean, I'm always. I don't want to say that this is the sunk cost fallacy, but there was some wisdom when you chose poker as a vocation. There was something about it that was captivating to you and interesting to you, and I would let go of it with some reflection or something like that. Of course, you could always let go and come back. I mean, it's not like the aim is going to fucking go anywhere, right? I mean,
Right.
the World Series of Poker will still be there in 20 years if you decide that it fits in. Let me ask you this: I seem to recall you're married with children. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have 2 girls. Yeah.
Oh, congratulations! How old are they?
I have a 8 and 3-year-old.
Right. So mine are almost the same distance apart. I have 2 boys, 12 and 6. That's a huge crimp in your ability to play live poker. Certainly, doing
Yes.
things like the World Series of Poker. That unless you've got, I mean, you probably have a very understanding wife anyway. I mean, if you were married during these 100K downswings, because for poker players, just like okay, it's a $100,000 downswing, whatever. And then for wives, it's like, well, how fucking much?
I'm not sure how she put up with me. I really don't know.
Well, she saw something she liked, and that's so cool. There's some interesting. Do you do MOOCs, by the way? Because I think there's some just amazing things in the MOOC world.
I haven't. Which ones do you do?
Well, I just sent you a link to a Coursera MOOC called Big History, which is a history. This may not be up your alley at all, but it's a history. It's history, but told from the over a 13.7 billion year perspective. When I was in high school, American elementary school, history began in 1776 or 1620,
Right.
where the Plymouth Rock was founded, or whatever. And this begins not with European or Greek history or ancient history, but it begins much sooner than that. So it includes human history, it includes human evolution, it includes the modern era, but it also includes cosmology and it finds these themes that link big history, cosmology, physics together. What are the things that link them together? I'm not going to go into a long story about what that might be at the moment, but it's fascinating. And there's another one on Coursera that might be up your alley. I think is called From the Modern to the Postmodern, which starts with the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution and the birth of modernity in the 16th and 17th century.
What is modernity?
Modernity is, that's a big thing. The modern era, modernity in psychological speak, is when there's the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. So basically, it's democracy, it's freedom, it's liberty, it's equality, it's reason rather than dogma, it's thinking for yourself rather than taking the authority of the church or the politicians or the king. So all of that good stuff that we have today, the scientific method, all of that was born over about 100-year period.
Okay. I could see that being fascinating, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and this dude covers it from the point of view of literature, philosophy, and science. So you'll study like Rousseau and Darwin and Voltaire and Kant. So it's really good. And the guy is an amazing lecturer. He's at Wesleyan University. But I'll send you the link. It's From the Modern to the Postmodern, and then all of that comes under criticism in the modern era as we get to the middle of the last century, the 20th century. All of these ideas began to be criticized, And we live in a world now where, we're dealing with the backwash of that criticism. So, people faith and the backlash against evolution and against science, and the backlash against knowledge, and the backlash against expert authority, and the backlash against universities and academic learning, and all of that is a sort of backlash against the modern era. But I'll send you the link from the modern to the postmodern. I promise you that if you watch the first episode, you'll be absolutely hooked up. I'm a big fan of MOOCs.
Yeah, I think.
Anyway, we should do this again, but let's wrap up. I know that you like to wrap up a particular way, so let's do that, and then if we want to talk some more, let's do that another time.
Yeah, absolutely. So lastly, I'll just say, if you're interested in history, Dan Carlin's Hardcore History is absolutely incredible. It's a free podcast on iTunes.
He's not a book writer. I'm more of a book reader. Dan Carlin.
Yeah, amazing speaker. His stuff on the Khans, like Genghis Khan, is incredible.
Cool.
So questions I wrap up with is, what are your morning routines, if any?
I'm a guy who is so allergic to routines of any kind. My life would be immeasurably better if I had them. If I had even just the 5-minute yoga and the 5-minute meditation and the 5-minute exercise, but I don't do shit. It's not always the case. So when I stay in my World Series of Poker house in the summer, I'm the guy who does 20 minutes yoga and 20 minutes meditation every morning in the house. They always make fun of me. But somehow when I come back to my life in Colorado as a writer and a business guy, I don't do shit. Right. So I don't have any routines.
Any writing routines?
And I'm much the worse for it. So that's not. I'm not proud of that at all.
Any writing routines?
No.
No writing routines. Okay.
I'm like allergic to routine. So
that's cool.
I don't do anything by routine. I think it's terrible. It's a big sort of gap in my self-mastery, self-management, but I don't have any routines at all.
Right.
Actually, I have one. My annual goal setting and my time management on a weekly basis, that's a routine, and that's what the book that you've got in front of you has a lot of, is I set goals on an annual basis, and I achieve most of them, and I manage my time on a weekly basis, so I have a very good way of setting goals for the week. And, on a good week, I'll get to 75% of them. On a bad week, I'll get to 40% of them. But whatever. But so I actually do plan the way I'd like life to go for a year. And I do have a vision for my life in 2020 and 2030 and all of that. So that's one of my routines that I would say I'm world class at. And you'll find a lot of that in that book that's in front of you.
That's really cool. Yeah, I have a feeling that routines aren't for everyone, and they might not be for me. So I think your answer is interesting.
I don't have the psychological equipment. Not that I couldn't overcome my deficits, maybe, but I've just not found a way so far.
Right. So this is a weird question. Everyone kind of struggles with it, but I think it's an interesting one. So the question is, what do you love? And aside from the obvious stuff, and it could be something really tiny, really small, or it could be something big, and it could be as many things as you could think of.
Well, I love science fiction, and I love science, so I find science fiction is one of the things that I enjoy most reading and watching. I get real sort of sometimes guilty pleasure, even when it's shitty science fiction, like some recent movies. So I love that, and I love science, and I love reading. So reading and self-development. So when I share these Coursera courses with you, I'm sharing something that's like just really precious to me. Like, this is shit that I've watched, and I'm just like, fuck. I could spend my whole life learning this. I'd be very, very happy. And a lot of the time when I'm researching books and I'm reading widely and reading interesting stuff, I love that. So it's one of the really good things about writing is that I actually enjoy. I don't like I don't like revising and reviewing shit, but I do like the creative part of writing.
Well,
Yeah, I mean
those are good.
That's a good tour. That's a good tour right there.
Yeah,
and I'm supposed to say mandatory footnote that I love my kids, or I'm supposed to start with that. I think that's a legit thing to do.
Right.
But I do.
Those are a given. Last one, books that. What is your top 3 favorite books, or one of your favorite books in any order? You don't have to.
Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance was really a transformational book for me.
Yeah.
That was an awesome book. What else? I'm a big reader. I read so much. A recent book that I found very enjoyable was a book by Walter Isaacson called The Innovators, which is the story of effectively the computer from the days of Babbage and Ida Lovelace up until Steve Jobs and Google. So I think that was a book I really enjoyed. And what else be up there?
2 was good. Good with 2.
Okay, I liked a lot of the philosophy books I read during my philosophy degrees. A Theory of Justice by John Rawls I thought was very brilliant. Anyway, there you go. There's a tour of. Good question.
All right. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is one of the few books that I've read twice. It's in my top 5 as well. So, Paul, where can people find you? Where can they find your books and all that?
Oh, paulgibbons.net. Paulgibbons.net has all of my books on it, and if you go to there, you'll find a way to my Twitter, which is there, my Facebook page, my YouTube page, blah, 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 all that stuff. I've got all that kind of stuff that you're supposed to have as an author platform.
Right.
Feel free to connect with me anywhere. I'm LinkedIn. So yeah,
so
I love to. I'm a bit of a Facebook hoe. Like I have, 1,500 Facebook friends, and that's kind of how I roll.
Right. So Paul Gibbons on Facebook. Obviously, what's your Twitter handle?
At Paul G Gibbons.
All right.
And YouTube is Philosophy First. And I actually have some stuff on Flourishing, I think, on Twitter, actually, on YouTube. But my website's kind of supposed to be the portal for all things Paul Gibbons. Anyway, so.
All right. Great.
And my books are The Science of Organizational Change, Reboot Your Life. I've got one called Reboot Your Career. And I've got a new one coming out, which is a kind of rewrite of Reboot Your Life, which is called Life Mastery, The Science and Tools of Personal Change.
When do we expect that one out?
I'm considering, it's finished. I'm considering going the New York publisher route. So I'm looking for a new agent at the moment. And when I find a new agent, the first question I'm going to ask her is this book worth publishing in a traditional way, or should I self-publish it? Right. And so if she says self-publish, then it'll be out the next week. And if she says New York publisher, then it'll take a few months, 3 months, 6 months.
Well,
they take fucking forever to write books.
Well, I think it's pretty good and worth it. I'll probably finish it. So yeah, thanks for coming on. Appreciate your time. I will probably invite you on again because I wish we had more time to go deeper.
Yeah, likewise. Hey, listen, on the book, by the way, if anything doesn't sit right with you, or you think, oh, this kind of sucks, or this doesn't belong here, or this should be shorter, or this should be longer, I'd be deeply grateful for any feedback you have on it.
Absolutely. So far, all I have is positive feedback. So
all right, well,
I'll let you know if anything sucks.
All right, cool. Please do. All right, Daryl. Talk to you soon.
All right, thanks.